The visceral combat in D3 is certainly the foundation of our combat model for D4. So when we think about that model, we looked at, well, where are things where we want to adjust from that sort of baseline? And so we wanted to make combat feel a little bit more intentional, add a little bit more stakes, and increase the clarity of the battlefield so that you feel like you can see, as if you can't see what decisions you're making or what monsters are doing, then it's hard to feel like you're making important decisions. You have to get that feedback, right? You know, it's been really useful to have beta tests, alpha tests that allow us to really dial in that threshold where the combat doesn't feel so slow that it's not capturing that feeling of momentum and that power fantasy and being a barbarian and jumping on demons and throwing them off cliffs. But that you feel like you have some stakes and that you're making decisions that matter on the battlefield. They're tactical decisions. We've got the evade skill that factors into that, so you can move around the battlefield. You know that you have that available. We can design mechanics and boss encounters and things that use that mechanic. And we feel like we've got it in a pretty good spot at this point. It's feeling fast, it's feeling like there's momentum, but there's still choices, and we're continuing to dial that in as we get closer to launch.
I think part of it is like it feels more grounded, right? Like one of the things you don't see are the blue, you know, of the sort of there's like the champion color code and the elite color code. Like they're not glowing yellow or glowing blue. Like everything's sort of grounded in the world, and so I think it feels different in that way, that it feels more grounded. Even the visual effects like that they've done is they feel a little less high fantasy and a little bit more kind of realistic and in the world, and especially the elemental stuff. And so I think that adds to a certain feel. But it as a non-designer, I find it really, listening to the conversations, you know, things like time to kill is really interesting to me. The notion of, okay, in this beta, it took this long to kill these many monsters, and that feels too slow, and so we've made these adjustments, and now our time to kill is this, and so in my mind, there's Joe's back there with a dial going like, turn it up, turn it down until we find it right. But it's been something that is a constant conversation around, because Diablo is a power fantasy, and so if it feels too arduous and too slow and too laborious, they feel like, oh, they're just meat sacks of hit points, and it's not fun to kill things. And if they're too fast, then you're just like, everything's made of paper and it doesn't matter, my strength doesn't matter. And so it really is about dialing it in to finding where you go, like, that should be challenging, that should be threatening, but I should also feel really strong in this moment or against this type of enemy. And so that's what Joe and the systems teams have been doing a great job of finding that sort of sweet spot in the game.
Yeah, you know, you mentioned how elites in Diablo 4 don't have a color coding. It's been really interesting for us to identify areas where we can ground the monsters more in the world, and then also identify where there are things where it's really important to have clear communication, right? So for example, there was a point where when monsters were hiding behind a doorway or a pillar or something, it's certainly more grounded to not have any information about that. But it also turns out to be very frustrating. And so, you know, we've you know, speaking to that, kind of dialing it in, figuring out, you know, where we need to do monster highlighting for clarity so that the player has battlefield information to know what kind of decisions to make, and where we need to ground the monsters in the world so you get that feeling of atmosphere. You feel like you're in a world that's dangerous and scary and there's unpredictability.